Adoption home study can be a phrase that strikes fear in the hearts of many, especially hopeful adoptive families. But today we're going to be talking to an actual licensed social worker who does adoption home studies on a daily and weekly basis. And she's going to break down the process for us and answer all of those burning questions that everybody asks inside the My Adoption Coach Facebook group. So stick around. If we haven't met yet, my name is Amanda, and I'm an adoptive mom of two on a mission to make your adoption easier, faster, and more affordable. I do that through free trainings like this one. So make sure you subscribe, click the little bell icon so that you get notified each and every time I release a new video. Today, we're talking with Steffany Aye, and she is a licensed social worker in the state of Kansas and the owner of Adoption and Beyond. Steffany has graciously agreed to join us tonight and be our expert on all things homesteady, which I know can make everybody's heart skip a beat, but I promise you, Steffany's not scary at all. She's so kind and gracious to join us today. And so, Steffany, just welcome to the show, and we're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Oh, thank you. As I shared a little bit in my intro, a lot of people get really nervous about adoption home studies. And having lived through this journey, I know that actually my social worker became like my best friend. She was a confidant through the process and really was there when I was unsure really what to do. So I'd love if you would share a little bit about your background, because I know that's just who you are as a person as well.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So I wanted to also expand that we are licensed in Kansas and Missouri.
Oh, great clarification. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm Steffany Aye, and I actually started Adoption Beyond 23 years ago. And we've just grown to be a larger child placing agency just here in the Kansas City area. And something that I've been in the adoption field for over 27 years because I used to work for another child placing agency before this. And so I've been doing home studies for a really long time. And then also, I have also been through the home study process myself, having adopted our daughter from foster care. So I've been on both ends of it. And I think the one thing that I love the most is, as you talked about, your social worker became your friend, is that is just something that I just enjoy, that relationship building and just really getting to know our families and just really developing long-term friendships. So
that is really amazing. And to me, that is one of the hidden gems that comes through in the adoption process for sure. So
yes.
Thank you. Thank you again. And I think you again provided such a unique perspective, having been on both sides of the table. So I really look forward to diving into our conversation today. Yeah. So I've solicited questions from our Facebook group, the My Adoption Coach Facebook group, from our audience. And that's what we're really going to focus on today. But our first question really just starts with a general overview of the process from your perspective.
So when I'm talking about anything about home studies, I'm going to be really talking from the perspective of our agency specifically.
Perfect.
And so I will say quite a few times, I'll say, well, it depends. So I did want to make that clarification. So the general process is that you will choose an agency. And I'm going to also speak about agencies, because social workers can also do home studies. But when a family is going to be looking at branching out and possibly working in other states, I always recommend that you go ahead and hire a licensed child placing agency, because then your home study would be good anywhere that is going to go, because not all states will take and recognize individual social workers. So that's one piece of advice. So when a family is looking for an agency, then you identify your agency that's licensed in your state to be able to do your home study. And then the process is that we gather. Usually it's paperwork. Each agency is structured a little bit differently in how they do it, but the basics of it are the paperwork gathering stage, the home visit and interview stage, and then the compiling and writing the report and proofing the stage. Those are the kind of three stages that families move through in doing their home study process.
Perfect. That is so helpful. So you made the clarification of a placing agency. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is, just so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, so a placing agency is a licensed child placing agency in your state. So it would be a licensed agency. And that's the clarification, because there are individual social workers who do home studies and adoptive home studies. But when you're going across state lines and you're involving interstate compact and you're dealing with all kinds of different states and the different rules, a child placing agency is the best place to start for a home study process.
Okay. And are you specifically meaning an adoption agency or a home study placing agency?
Normally, it's an adoption agency.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yes.
And just because I always, I have different folks at different stages of the process that, may be listening or watching to, our conversation. Can you talk about ICPC? You touched on it for a second, so I just want to make sure that they hear what that definition is.
Yes. So ICPC is also known as interstate compact. So when you go across state lines, basically it's a federal law, and it's making sure one state is aware of a child transferring over across state lines. So it's a bunch of paperwork that's sent from one state to the next. And with the internet now, and with ICPC paperwork being able to be sent electronically, ICPC process is going a lot quicker. But we used to tell families plan on 2 weeks within the state, but now we're getting families home usually within a week. But that's what it is. It's just making sure that a child's not being trafficked across state lines.
That totally makes sense. And that time frame doesn't begin until after the revocation period is up. So when you're thinking about preparing for the time that you might be in another state, you would take that particular state's revocation period and then add on kind of your guesstimate for ICPC clearance to come back to give kind of a total picture. I know back in 2015, when we adopted our oldest, we actually were in the state of Florida for 3 weeks and 1 day. That's exactly how long we were there, which, sounds amazing, right? On the surface, you think, wow, you got to have a Florida vacation for 3 weeks, but it's totally different when you're caring for a newborn, like
in a hotel room. Yes,
exactly.
Exactly. And you're just so desperate to get home. Everybody just wants to get home. And so, but there was something that you said that I wanted to touch on.
Was it revocation period? Or?
Yes. Okay. So yes. And also ICPC can't start until after the baby's been released from the hospital.
Oh, good clarification.
There has to be discharge paperwork that goes into the ICPC packet. And the person who does your ICPC can either be the social worker or agency that you're working with, or your attorney. Either one would be the people to do your paperwork for you.
So. Yeah. Wow. Automatically. That was just so jam-packed. So guys, feel free to pause, record, rewind that part, take a few notes because we covered a lot, even in just that one little question. So thank you. That's awesome. The next question I get a lot from our audience is when to do the home study. A lot of people are worried about when their home study will be finalized, and then that's starting their clock, and how does renewal work versus when I might get an opportunity. And so there seems to be a lot of chatter around when is the right time to actually do your home study?
So the right time to do it is once you've chosen the avenue that you're going to pursue. So there's several different avenues. And Amanda, you do a really great job of explaining the different avenues to families. And so once a family's chosen an avenue, then it's at that point in time that you want to start the home study process. Sometimes families, sometimes the adoption process can take a while. And so families think, oh, I have some time, but you'll be one of those families where something drops into your lap last minute, and you don't want to miss out on the opportunity by not having a home study done. So as soon as you decide, it's time to roll. So
agreed. Yeah. And when it comes to, I know this wasn't necessarily one of our questions, but we touched upon it. So I want to make sure we close that question in anybody's mind. When it comes to renewal time of that home study, can you talk a little bit about how the initial process versus a renewal process might differ?
Sure. So in a lot of states, not all, but most states, the home study expires in 12 months. I know there's some states that it could go 2 years or some are 18 months, but for the majority of the states, it's 12 months. So for us, we say it's half the work. So it's not like the initial home study. The initial home study is quite a bit of paperwork. So the update at the year mark is just usually another home visit and updating a few documents. So it's a pretty simple process.
Yeah, for us, when we were kind of going through our period in between children, because we brought our daughter home and we knew we wanted to adopt again. And one of the best pieces of advice that our agency had given us was keep your home study current, like just renew it and keep it. Because we had said, we're probably going to wait 2 years, and they were like, just keep it current. If you don't plan to move, if you don't plan to have these big life changes, because you never know, to your point, if an opportunity could drop in your lap, or quite honestly, it's just a lot less work to keep it current than it is to go back and redo it. So
it is.
Yeah. The next question we get a ton is just a lot of anxiety around a home visit. I know the audience is really curious about like, okay, how much do I need to clean? And, how does everything need to be ready and set up? And do I have to have a nursery? And do I have to have its own bedroom? Like all of these questions that really kind of come up around this, like, what is it like when someone actually comes into your home to inspect it?
Yeah. So one thing I want to point out is that some agencies come and do multiple home visits, and some agencies just come and do one. So some will come and do just one visit, and they'll do the individual interviews at the same time as the home visit. Some will do a home visit, and then they'll do individual interviews, maybe at the agency's office. So the number of times that they come to your home could vary from agency to agency. But for the most part, when they come for the home visit, it's really, for us, it's doing individual interviews together, doing interviews separately, also meeting any other kiddos or household members who are in the home. We also take a tour of the home and just make sure there's enough room and a safe place for a kiddo. So it can seem intimidating and kind of nerve-wracking. So it's not a white glove test. We're not there. And actually, we'd be concerned if it is spotless, because when a child joins your family, your home is not going to be spotless anymore. And we want to make sure you don't have those expectations. So,
right.
Yeah. So but we do expect you to pick up a little bit like you would for company, or something like that. So that, try to put families at ease. With regards to the nursery, no, you do not have to have the nursery done. Usually what families are doing is they're like, hey, here's the office. This will someday be the nursery. And that's usually what families do, because, preparing the nursery is really a personal preference, because it could be really difficult to walk past that nursery every day and see it empty. And that's just could be, heart-wrenching. So most of the times you do not need to have a nursery done ahead of time.
Yeah. For me, I was one of those people that knew I couldn't have a nursery. That the extent that I could go was to have a secret Pinterest board where I pinned ideas. And that was my safe space where I could process my emotions that way. But I knew I was not one that could set it up. And it's really great to hear you say it's not a white glove test. And we expect you to pick up, like companies coming over, but we expect it to be normal. And because ultimately you want to see what life is like for this family, right? And you're really just looking to see that this child's going to be safe, right? Safe and loved.
Correct.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
And so thank you for touching on both of those. I know we also get a lot of questions around apartments. Do I have to have a house or an apartment? And then the sub question that we get occasionally is, I also have other people that that live with me or that I live with. How do those things really kind of go together?
Sure. So you do not need to be in a house. You can be in an apartment as long as the apartment has enough room for a baby to join your family. So, sometimes families will ask, I have a 1-bedroom apartment. Is that going to be a problem? Not at the very beginning, because usually families have a crib or a bassinet in their room with the baby to begin with anyway. So that's not a problem. It's just as a child grows older, they'll need their own separate space. But so apartment's not a problem at all. Renting's not a problem at all. Other household members, they are included in the home study process. So we do interview them. We do have documents that we have to gather, such as birth certificates on household members. They have to have a medical done, just like the adopting family as well. So there's just a few extra little documents that they have to do, and being interviewed as well. So
that totally makes sense. Yeah. The rule of thumb I had heard was, if they dwell in the household, they have to go on the home study, which totally makes sense.
that's correct.
I oftentimes in our community, we are finding folks that are coming in that maybe were foster parents and now have decided to privately adopt. And they ask a lot about how the home study process differs between the two, and if their home study is transferable between foster care and private adoption.
So the biggest difference between foster care and private domestic home studies is that in terms of the safety measures that need to be done within the home, the foster care is much more stringent than a private domestic, where you have to have square footage per person in the home. You have to have we didn't become licensed as foster parents because our home was too old, and because you had to have very specific requirements. You had to have a railing going down. We have a split level, so there's lots of stairs. And so we had to have a railing down some of the stairs. And so just some things that you just don't have to do for private domestic. So that's the biggest difference, is just the safety features within the home. Because when you adopt a child from foster care, typically those children are a little bit older. And so you need to have the home safety for them. Whereas a typical private adoption, you're bringing home a baby and they're not moving around very much at that first part. So you don't have to have a lot of safety measures done. So that's the biggest difference between the two. Now, with regards to the home study being transferable, for the most part, it is. Now, I've seen some really bad foster care home studies where it's just 2 or 3 pages and it's just forms filled out by hand. That's not a traditional home study. So in those situations, we help families update those to make them more applicable to a private adoption. But for the most part, they're transferable between the two different kinds of adoptions.
Okay, that's wonderful. And you touched on safety measures. Do you mind to elaborate a little bit more around what you're looking for when you come for a home visit around safety measures?
Yeah, so it's basic safety measures that you would have and expect to see in any home, such as firearms. Are they stored in a safe or a lockbox, or have a gun lock on them? Is the ammunition stored separately? So that's a big one, is ammunition and guns and firearms in the home. Do you have a fire extinguisher in the kitchen? Do you have a smoke detector around the bedrooms? Do you have a carbon monoxide detector in the home? If you have a fireplace, is there a screen or a door on the fireplace? And then if you have a pool, is there some kind of fencing or some kind of safety measures put around that pool? So those are some of the basic safety features that we're looking for.
Okay. I get a lot of specific questions around like outlet covers or like locks on cabinets and things of that nature.
Yeah, we don't expect those things to be done because your child's not going to be mobile for a lot of years. And that's a lot of years to be pulling out those little plastic plugs longer than you need to. So we do not expect those. Now, we will talk about, for example, see those stairs over there? How do you plan on securing those stairs when your child becomes mobile? So we'll talk through safety stuff, but we don't expect it to be in place.
That is great. Yeah, I can tell you the plugs are annoying. I was so thankful when my children got past that stage.
Exactly.
That was great. So I know that there are a lot of questions and concerns as it relates to kind of call it the family medical history part of the home study. Mm-hmm. So specifically, a couple of key themes that come up are around mental illness and around weight. And are there any restrictions or things that would disqualify folks from being eligible to adopt as it relates to those two topics?
So let's talk about weight. The only time that weight has ever been an issue is if you're going to be adopting a child from China. So if you're doing an international home study, then weight does play a factor, and also Korea too, for the adopting family. But domestically, it does not play a factor at all. As long as you can get a physician's note indicating that you have a normal life expectancy, then you can adopt domestically. So going to mental health, we have a lot of families who have mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, and those things, just sometimes just come and follow infertility. So that's not uncommon for our families to have experienced those or are still experiencing those. And then also, we've had families who've had bipolar and they're on medication, they're stable, they take their medication on a regular basis. So we don't find that a lot of mental health issues really impact families as long as they're able to get a physician's clearance. So,
yeah, that's awesome. That was something that I experienced. I know I had a client recently that I was coaching through, and she was very nervous about this. And I said, talk to your doctors. And as long as you have a note, and then share it with your agency before you sign the contract, and just be really upfront and honest, and make sure that you feel comfortable with that. So that's awesome. Another question that we get quite a lot is around kind of any past criminal history, and, how does that follow you through the process, and how does that impact your ability to be able to adopt?
So the one thing that we find is that most criminal histories does not impact the family's ability to be able to adopt, with the exception of felonies. Felonies pretty much across the board would disqualify a family. Now, we have it broken out to where there are, I think writing a hot check and forgetting that you close an account can cause a felony, whereas we view that very differently than a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Harming somebody else kind of felony. So that's where we kind of draw the line. So not all felonies would disqualify a family. So I always recommend that families just, like you said, be upfront and be honest, and just ask those questions and make sure they seek clarity on, will this be an issue before they move forward? And because some agencies have different policies. So some agencies may have a problem with something and some may not. Where the biggest problem comes is when you hide it. Because a lot of people are under the impression that an expunged record is an expunged record, and that is not correct. When it comes to home study and the records that we're able to receive, it goes even back to when you were a minor. Wow. So it goes clear on back and nothing is expunged. So that's where families get into trouble, is when they try to hide it because they're nervous, they're scared, and they don't think it's going to show up, and it does. And then that's where the issues become, in that we start losing trust in this relationship with the family. And so just be honest.
Yeah. Honestly, I think that honesty throughout the entire journey is just the best golden rule to keep in mind. Yes. And there are going to be tough situations to talk about. It's going to be emotional. it is, of course, highly personal, but it's about making sure that you feel that you're in a safe space to have those conversations and really share what's going on, what you're concerned about, and really the truth of who you are at every stage of the adoption journey.
Very true. And so one thing I did want to say is that something that would disqualify someone is a substantiated child abuse on their history. So we have found that has stopped families from being able to adopt.
So if you have an allegation that wasn't proven true, then that
usually does not impact you. No.
Okay. Awesome. Wow. We have just been flying through so many topics so quickly. You're such a wealth of information. This is just amazing. I would just love if there are any other kind of tips or recommendations that you have for people that are just starting out their process from a home study perspective. As a veteran in the industry, what tips would you have to share with them?
Yeah. So I always tell families, I always start off is that the home study process is very intrusive. Personal questions are asked about your family, your finances, and your background, but your agency isn't asking for anything they're not required to by agency policy or regulation. So just be prepared.
Yeah.
It's very personal. And then also, try not to be too nervous. I remember when I was going through the process, I was so scared that my speeding ticket that I had like 6 months ago was going to disqualify me from adopting our daughter, which I knew that was not true. And I knew that was an irrational fear. But even myself as a social adoption social worker, I even had those fears. So I totally get it. And I totally understand, but just know that, 99.9% of the families who do the home stay process make it through the home stay process just fine. So
yeah. I know when we were going through the process, my husband was incredibly nervous about the interview.
yeah.
And he kept saying, what kind of questions are they going to ask me? And like, should we prepare our answers together? So that way, when they ask us separate questions, we're ready to go. He likes to be super prepared and know what's going to happen. And so I felt like I Googled forever, like, what's this going to be like, and tried to explain. I was like, oh, watch this video, listen to this person, all of those things. So do you mind just to share a little bit about like really how that interview process goes?
So we usually start out interviewing the family together. And, for us, okay, so this is something that's different between agencies. Some agencies I mentioned do multiple visits and do hours of interviewing. And so for us, we're a little bit different in that we have families write autobiographies and we give families a list of questions. And so we find that when families have time to really think and process through the questions that are being asked of them, they have time to not just be put on the spot, with a question. And so they're able to think through it and answer it. And so from the autobiographies, if we have further questions, we will go a little bit further into it. But so one of the fun questions that we ask in terms of comparing notes is that, we'll ask, what was your last fight? What was it about? And how did you resolve it? So we're looking for, problem solving skills and things like that. And so if you want to compare notes, you can think of, what was our last fight?
I love that.
Yeah. So, and then just interviewing, why do you want to adopt? Are you guys both on the same page? We talk about infertility. We talk about what was that like? Where have you grieved the loss of having a biological child? And so we explore that with the family. Is your family excited and for you to be able to adopt? If you're going to adopt a child who's transracial, is your family going to be accepting of that child who's going to come into your home of another race? So just really exploring their thoughts and feelings, and also extended family and how this child is going to be accepted. What are their thoughts on openness, and how do they plan on interacting with the expecting mom before and after placement? Mm-hmm. We also go into like their history, their childhood. What was their childhood like? What are their thoughts on discipline? What are their thoughts on child rearing just in general, and childcare? What are the plans for childcare after the child arrives? How do you balance out household chores? How do you work together? So those are some of the questions that we dive into and talk about as part of the home study process.
I think that is wonderful. And I think the other kind of hidden gem in there that honestly, it took me a little too long to realize myself is that this was an opportunity for us to begin to like set the structure of what life was going to be like once a child came into our home. Mm-hmm. And it was, a little bit closer into a child coming into our home that it really kind of dawned on me what that life was going to be like. I'd been so wrapped up in the process of wanting to adopt. I hadn't really stopped to think enough about that part of the phase. And so I think that's the blessing in the questions that are asked in the home study. And I can remember in my own journey, I was a little irritated. I was like, why do you have to know these things? And like, what is this about?
Exactly.
And that's where my home study coordinator, Jasmine, was just amazing. And she was just like, okay, let's like calibrate. Because I told her, I was like, listen, I'm going to be honest, like this feels a little weird, like, and she was like, well, let's reframe this and let's think about how these tools, how they are actually tools to help you. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah. So we also, I said we have our families write autobiographies. I encourage them to trade them and read them and read each other's autobiographies. And so we find that sometimes they're like, oh, I didn't know that, or they learn something new when they read each other's autobiographies. So it helps in the growth of the marriage as well. So if they're married, so
It does.
yeah.
Wow, that is really awesome.
Mhm.
Well, I have just absolutely enjoyed and loved talking with you tonight. This has just been a
Thank you.
wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about where to get in touch with you, how to find out more about you and your services, and just generally how they can learn more from you?
Sure. So our website is adoption-beyond.org. And so we are a non-for-profit child placement agency in Kansas City. And so that's the best way to find us, is just to Google us and find us on our website. And as I mentioned, we work both in Kansas and Missouri. So we cover the entire state. So no matter where a family lives in Kansas and Missouri, we're able to help them do their home study because we have caseworkers placed throughout the state. So that's just a little bit more about us. So
This conversation has been amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
So one thing I would recommend when families are looking for a agency to do their home study, just know that the paperwork is going to be pretty much the same. So that's consistent. But what's different between each agency is the process that they do the home study, the time that it takes to do the home study, and also the cost. So those are the three factors. So when you're looking at an agency, be sure you ask those specific questions. And so that way, when you're comparing agencies, you're comparing apples to apples. And just know that I wouldn't necessarily shop around just on cost alone, because you may find that you really want to find someone you have a connection with, someone that you really feel you can trust. And so the best way to do that is just to pick up the phone and just call and just find who actually takes the time to talk with you on the phone when you call. So to look for those things too, because those are really important in the process.
That is really important. And I don't know what I would have done had I not had that sense of comfort and trust with my partner. She really, I mean, she counseled me through it when we, had our situation that didn't work out after 7 days of parenting. She was, a key member, key player in getting me back up off the couch and inspiring me to, put one foot in front of the other and keep walking. So that connection is really important. And honestly, there's no amount of money that would have made that connection, it was just so worth the investment in those services to have that support.
Yeah, so we're not looking for reasons to disqualify someone. We're looking for ways to help you through this process and to help you jump through the necessary hoops. That's what we're here for, is to be your guide and to help you through the process.
That is phenomenal and such a wealth of information. And honestly, just taking the scariness out of the home study process. So this has just been an amazing conversation. Thank you again so much for joining us.
It was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it. Wasn't that such an amazing conversation with Steffany today? I hope you feel like you're walking away with real, tangible advice on how to prepare and ultimately pass your adoption home study. And maybe you've calmed your heart rate just a little bit when you think about your adoption home study. And remember, I've always got your back. And inside our Facebook community, we answer questions like this on a daily basis. So if you have any questions, make sure you head on over to the Facebook community and drop me a line. I look forward to hearing from you, friend. And remember, anything's possible with the right plan or support, and I've got your back 100% of the way. See you soon.